and welcome to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. My guest this evening is Congressman Joe Courtney. Congressman, welcome. How are you, my friend?
Peter, always a pleasure.
Good to see you again.
It's been a while.
It has been a while. How have you been?
No complaints.
No? Everything's good?
Yep.
All right, cool.
Yep.
So, let's start talking about, I have a list of things that we're going to talk about tonight. So want to start with talk about tariffs?
Sure.
All right.
So, I've been home for a couple weeks now, and as everybody knows, who's been following the news, the Trump administration is taking a very aggressive position towards countries that we trade with and have been for over the years, and basically putting in place tariffs on incoming goods coming into the U.S. A tariff is basically a tax. I mean, when you sort of boil it all down, it's just raising the cost of a product that's coming into the U.S. And not surprisingly, some of the countries that we're putting tariffs up against are responding with their own tariffs. That again affects our company's ability to send products into those countries. So, for example, Mexico has put a tariff on U.S. cheese that we sell into to the country of Mexico. That's actually a pretty big deal. That's our number one customer for dairy products all across the world. They consume a lot of cheese. Wow. And anyone who loves Mexican food, which I'm sure I do. I'm sure most of your listeners do.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, cheese is a big part of the Mexican diet.
Oh, definitely.
So putting a tariff on U.S. cheese going into Mexico actually has had a really negative impact on U.S. dairy farmers, and we have actually quite a few dairy farms in eastern Connecticut.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, they sell milk by the hundredweight. That's the way the pricing system works. And I was out with a farm up in Durham not too long ago, which unfortunately is closing after 4 generations and they were talking about a lot of reasons why that decision was made, but it didn't help matters that the price of dairy dropped $1 per hundredweight because of the counter tariffs that Mexico put into place. So that's not the only instance where we've been running into that kind of static. China obviously is a country that the Trump tariffs have been aimed at. And we're seeing, again, pushback by China. So they put a tariff on U.S. shellfish going into China. And we have a company in Groton, Garbo Lobster, which has been around for 30 years.
Oh, sure.
50% of their sales are to the European Union and to China. And as the owner said, when China put a 25% tariff on U.S. shellfish, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, he said it was like a light switch went off because all the orders into China were completely canceled and eliminated. EU right now, we're still sort of in a dance right now in terms of whether or not the U.S. is really going to impose tariffs on the EU. But if they do, that other big component of their sales is also going to get hard hit. So the owner, who was interviewed by the New London Day and on Channel 30 News last week, came right out and said, if this doesn't change, we're going out of business. And again, this is a company that employs people here locally. I was up in Pomfret, Hull Lumber, which is, again, a company that's been in the Hull family for many years. Again, it's a sawmill. I mean, we bring all this lumber in, particularly from around the area. People sell into their lumber yard. They cut the wood. They make it floorboards ready for export. Again, they sell all across the world, but lately their number one customer has been China. And, that's a country with over 1 billion people. Their market is just enormous for U.S. lumber products. The day we were up there last week, it was like crickets. I mean, the place was completely silent. All the sawmills were completely quiet and turned off. They showed us a letter that they sent out to all their vendors, basically saying, sorry, we can't buy any of your wood right now. And what I heard from a lot of these customers who were big supporters of the administration, actually in the last election, was basically we understand there's issues, with these countries, that we've got to sort of deal with in terms of trade practices that are out there right now. But imposing tariffs is really, you better have an end game here in terms of, what's going to happen with the tariffs and the counter tariffs and the, next round of tariffs. And right now, nobody sort of has a sense that the administration really has a landing place right now for what's going on with Canada, Mexico, China, but frankly for a lot of other countries that are out there. And as I said, sometimes you read about these issues and you think, oh, that's, doesn't affect Connecticut, it doesn't affect, it does.
Yeah, sure it does.
And that's really that's sort of my report.
Exactly.
From being back home here in district. And as I said, we are reporting in to Washington.
Okay.
And I met with the Commerce Department after the visit to Garbo Lobster that they should be aware of the fact that this is we're trying to promote exports because that's good for American jobs.
Absolutely.
And to the extent that we're seeing this dynamic blow up out there, that that's going to really inhibit a lot of hard work that these companies have put in to sell overseas. Made in America. That lumber is made in America. Those lobsters were harvested and brought in for distribution in America. And that's the kind of companies we want to nurture and support, not get caught in the crossfire.
Exactly, totally.
Yeah.
And I saw this earlier today, I guess the president was on the news signing a bill.
That's right. So that's the annual defense authorization bill.
Okay.
And that's a good thing. I was up at Fort Drum, New York, which is one of the big military bases up there. But I serve on the House Armed Services Committee.
Yes,
as
you
know.
do. Let's talk about the bill.
And I'm ranking on Sea Power. So in terms of locally, it's a very good bill. It's again for next year. It's going to continue the Navy's investment here in the southeastern Connecticut shoreline area. Electric Boat, which has been hiring off the charts.
Oh yeah.
They passed the 16,000 mark in terms of their workforce this year. When you and I were talking about my first race back in 2007 and 2008, the workforce was about half of that. So, and they're going to keep growing, with this defense bill, which we passed through. So I was down at Electric Boat last week. We visited the newest Virginia-class submarine that's going to get christened on October, the USS Vermont. I brought some maple syrup for the captain to show that Connecticut makes maple syrup too.
All right.
We also got a new contract for repairs for the USS Indiana, which is a new sub that was commissioned a while ago. So that's going to basically protect about 300 jobs that might have been a little bit at risk in the metal trade side. So that was really a very good development that's there. And then lastly, the Columbia program, which is the new class of submarines these are big ones. They're 2.5 times the size of the subs that are like the Vermont, it looks like. So it's going to be a lot of work this is not a one-year blip.
No.
I mean, we're talking a very strong trend. And really the question of the day, as I was talking to one of your colleagues, is just whether we're going to have the workforce that's ready to take on this kind of work. And job training programs, getting our education programs aligned with these trends. I mean, it's also happening at Pratt & Whitney, who's, their engine work right now, they've got actually a couple thousand engines backlog. So, for Connecticut, it's a great opportunity. Historically, these are programs that we've worked on going back to World War II, and hopefully, we're going to have a state government after the election in November that's going to be a partner to make sure that these workers and employees who are going to make good wages and salaries are going to be positioned to make sure that we're ready to take on this work.
Exactly. And you and I were also talking off camera this afternoon, talking about, I guess there's the new way of doing robocalls.
Yeah, so one of the big complaints that we hear in my office is from people who are getting bombarded, with these robocalls every single day. My house is no different, when I get home. And so, back a number of years ago, about 10 years or so ago, a law was passed, the Do Not Call list, which, again, you could register with the Federal Trade Commission. They would put you on a list, and, that was supposed to keep you, protected from these calls coming in nonstop. The FTC's ability to sort of police that has really obviously collapsed in recent years because these automated calls are coming into people's homes. And so there's a new bill that's pending in Congress, the RoboCop call program, which basically says, we're going to go past the FTC. We're actually going to go to the telecom companies themselves and basically force them to give people technology so that calls from outside of your area code or just unwanted calls are going to be blocked from coming into your house. We haven't passed the bill yet, but it's but clearly we got to do something here.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the calls I had, I was on talk radio in Norwich, and this gentleman was talking about he's disabled, and so when the call, the phone rings, it's really an effort to get to the phone,
right,
to answer it, and the majority of the time it's just some junk call that's coming in, and it's a real hardship actually for some people. The other thing what we're hearing is just people who are just total shysters who are calling into people's houses, pretending to be the IRS, acting like people. We just was talking to someone off camera who, doesn't have any student loans, but they've been calling her, harassing her about, her student loan debt.
Exactly.
And so, that's a whole different class of just actual criminal behavior that's there. We've been taking some police folks out to advise, particularly seniors, about these IRS calls.
Absolutely.
And your grandson is got arrested, and send us money, or totally, like I said, fraudulent and criminal actually to be doing that. So. If that comes in, we ask, we get a lot of people who call our office and complain about it. And I want you to know at least that, there are other members of Congress that are working together to try and get a hold of this, because it just seems like it just gets worse and worse in terms of the volume of calls that people are experiencing.
How's the bill looking?
So it's over at the Energy and Commerce Committee. That's the committee that deals with telecommunications.
Okay.
This Congress is kind of. The Speaker Ryan, it's not been the most productive. Having the president sign a bill like he did today, that's actually one of the few bright spots recently. And we'll see whether after this election, but that's the kind of bill that I really think the American public would really like to see Congress move on. In addition to things like protecting net neutrality, which is definitely at risk. That's the internet system that basically keeps a level playing field for people's access to the internet. Unfortunately, the Trump FCC Commission, Federal Communications Commission, repealed net neutrality, which sort of basically allows the telecommunication companies to charge more for different levels of internet service, which has never been, the way it works in the past. We have gotten bombarded with people calling our office enraged about the fact that the net neutrality rules were repealed, and Congress actually can reverse that, and I'm a co-sponsor of the bill to do exactly that, but unfortunately the Speaker has just refused to allow us to even have a vote in the House on that.
Oh, really?
Yes. Actually, it did pass in the Senate. So it's really it's in Paul Ryan's hands, and like so many other bills, he's really gotten in the way of letting us actually just have a fair chance to have a vote.
Exactly. Joe, do you mind sticking around?
Sure.
We'll be right back.
Yep.
On page 4 that the projections need to be flood next Thursday.
Seriously? Thursday? Can't do that.
This is really inconvenient.
I have yoga that day.
I have no time for this.
So.
I can't do Thursday, but I can do Friday.
Disasters don't plan ahead. You can. Talk to your loved ones about how you're going to be ready in an emergency. Don't wait. Communicate.
And welcome back to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show, sitting here with Congressman Joe Courtney. Congressman, welcome back.
Great to be here.
Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for sticking around.
To talk about.
Trust us, we got a lot to talk about. There's always some stuff to talk about with you. All right, let's talk about coming back with opening up this segment. Let's talk about the GI Bill.
Sure. So, one of the most successful government programs in American history, and that's really not an overstatement, was the GI Bill that was signed into law by Franklin Roosevelt at the end of World War II. He actually signed it 2 weeks after D-Day because I think people knew, things were starting to move in the right direction, and that if and when the war ended, we're going to have millions of troops coming home, and how they sort of adjust to civilian life and get back into the U.S. economy was obviously something that people were already thinking about, even though the war hadn't even ended yet. I mean, if you recall, World War I, they had a terrible record of helping veterans after World War I. They had the tent cities in Washington, and it was really, ugly, in terms of that. So anyway, the GI Bill set up a basic program that said, we'll give you an educational benefit and a living stipend, and give you a chance to sort of catch up, and succeed in life. And the people who benefited from the GI Bill, Johnny Carson, remember Johnny Carson show, Clint Eastwood benefited from the GI Bill.
Really?
And he was very successful actor, director.
Oh, totally.
Harry Belafonte, the singer. He was a GI Bill. It's really interesting to sort of read about the people who benefited from the GI Bill. But over time, the GI Bill sort of deteriorated. It didn't keep up with the cost of education. The living stipend had kind of slipped. So back in 2008, when I was brand new in Congress, there was what's called the post 9/11 GI Bill. It kind of updated the GI Bill. It boosted the educational benefit to be the equivalent of tuition at a 4-year institution from the state in which the veteran lives. So in Connecticut, that would be UConn, and then there was a living stipend attached to it. It also had a feature that allowed the veteran to transfer the benefit to a spouse or child only one time. If you had a family of 10, sorry, you can only do it once.
You only get it once.
But for some veterans, particularly Guard and Reserve, who would actually, a lot of these guys are older and gals are older, and so they might already have their degree. Okay. So having the ability to transfer the benefit to a child, was just a huge way of, number one, saying thank you. I mean, we have an all-volunteer force now. Sure. And this is the longest conflict in American history in Afghanistan that's there. So anyway, I remember actually after we passed the bill, I was over in Iraq on a CODEL. One of those congressional trips overseas. Yeah, sure. It was right before Christmas in 2008. George Bush had signed it into law in August. And we went in to meet with a whole bunch of National Guards folks that were there. And one of the members that was on board brought a bunch of gumbo, shrimp gumbo from Mississippi, which was very popular. And I brought some chocolates from Munson's Chocolates. Oh, sure. They were Yukon Husky chocolates. There you go. Anyway, we were having a lot of, really good time. All they wanted to talk about was the new GI Bill. Really? I mean, it was just like, they didn't want to talk about, the war. They didn't want to talk about politics. They wanted to know about the new GI Bill. And I was just like, okay, this is a big deal. Yeah. And as it has been wildly successful, in terms of, being a benefit, particularly the transferability feature. Unfortunately, the Trump administration's Department of Defense announced a rule change in the program that basically said if you're 4 years, if you're 4 years from 20 years of service, in other words, 16 years of service, you can no longer transfer the benefit, just arbitrarily eliminating that transferability feature, which is really, in my opinion, a real blindside on people who had actually sort of already been planning their retirement and had stayed in the military, assuming that, hey, I've got something I can have for my kids that's there. So I organized a bipartisan letter with 83 other members of Congress. This happened right before we left for home in July, basically saying, wait a minute, you can't do this. You can't sort of bait and switch. Folks who have really built their decisions to re-enlist, based around the fact that, this is something that I can, at least I'll have that affordable option for college, either for myself or my wife or my husband or my daughter or son. We've gotten national press on this, and we're going to keep fighting to protect that benefit, because it's really, it's helped the country to give people that option to get a degree and to contribute after they leave military service.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, what about the EPA visit that you just
So
did?
yeah, last week we had the regional administrator for New England. They cut up the country into different sections,
Yep.
and this was our administrator for New England. So she came down here. Again, she's a Trump appointee,
Okay.
but very professional in terms of her background, in terms of working in environmental areas there.
Mm-hmm.
We had a nice event over at Hammonasset, presented a $200,000 grant that goes to the Department of Public Health. They go out and do the water testing
Yep.
to make sure the bacteria levels aren't unsafe.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know that EPA actually pays for that program. It doesn't come from the state of Connecticut. And I was glad we did that, because EPA gets treated like a punching bag
Okay.
down in
Yeah.
Washington, and sometimes I think it really helps people to understand that beach grants, brownfield cleanup programs, all this stuff comes through from EPA. We made a number of other stops around the district, and it was good to get her in Eastern Connecticut and educated about some of the work that EPA has done over the years.
And the visit went well?
It was very successful. We stopped at the submarine base because they had some cleanup that they had to do. I mean, it's an old base.
Yeah.
It goes back over 100 years, and back in the day, they had waste oil,
Oh, yeah.
throw it over.
Dump it over.
Yeah, right. And they've had a lot of cleanup. They've really succeeded. They're almost completely done now, and their whole way of handling hazardous material on the base has been completely changed. I mean, it's a very environmentally conscious institution right now, which it's really impressive. And the brief that the EPA administrator got from Captain Whitescarver, who's the captain of the base there, was really. She was very excited,
Nice.
to hear all that.
Very good. Very
Yep.
good. Now let's talk about Gary Wright.
Yeah, Jerry Wright.
Jerry Wright.
Yeah. So, this district, as you know, is huge.
Yes.
Goes all the way up to the Mass border. And up in Andover, there's an Army veteran, First Sergeant, served in Vietnam, Jerry Wright.
Okay.
Who, if you ever see like these veterans events with the motorcycles, the
Yep.
Patriot Riders and the Legion Riders, Jerry's always there. He's always helping out. And but when Jerry was over in Vietnam, his job was to spray Agent Orange. I mean, he actually has pictures of him with this massive spray gun on the back of a truck, just spraying herbicide.
Yep.
And it was a very toxic substance, Agent Orange. It was
Yep.
a dioxin, and but back then you're 20 years old, and
Yeah,
they're telling you don't worry about it.
Yeah,
It
okay.
washes off.
Sure.
And today, and he's the first to talk about it. I mean, he suffers from some pretty nasty skin ailments from the exposure that he had. So the VA will cover some, Agent Orange related illnesses that are there. But in the case of these skin conditions, if you didn't report it within 1 year of date of discharge, you're shut out of the system. So this is like a situation that goes back literally to the 1970s.
Yeah.
He's a young guy who I'm sure when he got discharged, like so many others, the first thing is on their mind is just to sort of get back
Yeah.
into the swing of things at home. And you're asking them to self-diagnose
Yeah, right.
their skin condition, which they were told at the time, don't worry.
Don't worry about it.
This stuff is safe. So as a result, guys like him have been excluded from getting VA services. And so, right before the July break, working with Jerry, we introduced a bill called the Agent Orange Fairness Exposure Act,
Okay.
or Agent Orange Exposure Fairness Act,
Okay.
which HR 6566, which would basically eliminate that 1 year reporting requirement so that guys like him can get a fair chance to go in and get treated. The VA does not dispute the fact that his skin condition was, definitely an illness that is caused by Agent Orange.
Right.
So come on, let's stop with these Mickey Mouse rules that say, oh, sorry, you didn't report it 40 years ago.
Yeah, so we're not going to do anything
Right.
about it now.
So anyway, he's been working hard with the American Legion here in Connecticut. They've already adopted it as a bill that they endorsed. They're going to take it to the national American Legion. We're going to start getting the word out to other members and really try and build some national support behind Jerry's work. And he's a great guy.
Is he?
Just a super person. Real giver. He
Yeah.
always tries to help out other people, particularly veterans.
Exactly. So what else is going on?
Well, there's another Agent Orange bill called the Blue Water.
Yeah.
Which is again, and when we talk about Mickey Mouse rules, so back in 2001, a Vietnam veteran who served in the Navy, again had some Agent Orange type of illnesses, filed a claim, and his claim was denied on the grounds that he never put a foot on the ground on Vietnamese soil. So he was on board ships, and as people who served over in Vietnam will tell you, they delivered this stuff, in big metal drums over the area. So there was, lots of exposure. Even when you were tied up close to shore, there was sometimes Agent Orange being sprayed and had exposure. So the notion that, you had to demonstrate that you actually had your foot on the ground to be eligible for VA benefits was, it's really just, again, totally Mickey Mouse and arbitrary. So that decision back in 2001 was appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, failed. And so there's been a bill in Congress to basically eliminate the foot on the ground requirement. Again, I'm lead Democratic sponsor. Republican Congressman from California, David Valdiveo, is the Republican lead sponsor. Again, in June, we actually had a vote where we passed this bill for the first time in history. We got the Blue Water bill passed in the House, and it passed unanimously. I mean, which really shows that people realize that this is just a very unfair, arbitrary rule to have in place. And so now it's up in the Senate. There was a hearing in the Senate in early August, because they're not on recess right now, which didn't go so well. The VA came in and actually opposed the bill, which is just, it's why people get very cynical about the VA, not being there to help people. There's a bumper sticker that says "sprayed and betrayed," about the way the Agent Orange guys were treated, and it's an angry thing. But frankly, you can't blame people. That something like that is, which we know now that the science around Agent Orange is well understood. The causal connection to medical condition is well understood. So let's take care of these guys. And frankly, they're not getting any younger.
No, Congressman.
Yep.
We're out of time.
Okay, good.
That's it.
All right, it's always good to be here.
Thanks for coming down. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, buddy.
Absolutely.
On behalf of Congressman Joe Courtney, I'm Pete Mezzetti. Thanks, good night, and we'll see you next time.